So when you think of AAA, what do you picture? Probably something like this. Or maybe this. Or maybe something like this. Or if you've actually visited a AAA branch, like I last did in 2018 to get an international driver's license, you might picture that branch's decor, the things they sold, or even a helpful employee you met there. But you should actually picture something like this, or this. Because AAA has been a key force in shaping American roads to favor cars above all else. And much of that comes from their LA chapter, the Auto Club of Southern California, who used LA as a laboratory to devise and test these policies. Now, the Auto Club was founded in 1900 as a social club for driving enthusiasts, so they would sponsor road rallies and long-distance trips. But back then, car travel was really difficult. Only 7 or 8% of American roads were paved, so soon some of the club members began to envision an organization that would actively work to improve both road conditions and driving conditions around Southern California and beyond. And they were inspired by the Good Roads movement, which had already been agitating for paved roads. They would actually predated the car. It was started by cyclists in 1880 at the dawn of the Great American Bike Boom. By the 1890s, people rode bikes in American cities as much as they do now in Amsterdam and Copenhagen. You could even say LA's first freeway was for cyclists. This was the California Cycleway, which opened in 1900, the same year the Auto Club was founded. It went from one hotel in Pasadena to another in South Pasadena and was meant to parallel the Arroyo Seco all the way to downtown, though it was never completed. But back to the Auto Club. They would go on to do far more than fight for good roads, but ultimately their mission has always been the same as it was then, to maximize ease of movement for cars and to minimize the obstacles in their way. And they had their work cut out for them. This is downtown LA in 1912. So you can see a mix of cars, streetcars, horse-drawn carts, bikes, and pedestrians. In all American cities, there was a shared understanding that streets were public space and that people had a right to be in the street. Kids played in the street and pedestrians crossed wherever they pleased, often without bothering to look. As cars became more popular, there started to be a lot of pedestrian deaths, usually kids or the elderly. Now, to put this chart in perspective, in 2023, the US had 7,300 pedestrian deaths. So that's similar to 1916, which is the middle of this chart. But the country's population then was only 100 million, and we had way fewer roads. So this was a pretty typical occurrence. And generally, the car was blamed. Not only was it seen as normal for pedestrians to freely use the street, but cars were seen as playthings for the wealthy. They were called pleasure cars, kind of like how we think of yachts today. The proposed solution to pedestrian deaths was generally to make cars slower. So many demanded new laws or even speed governors that would prevent cars from exceeding 25 miles per hour. Car sales were plateauing and the industry was worried. So was the Auto Club, who in 1924 advanced a solution that combined physical and social engineering. So by this point, the club's membership included LA's power brokers, people like Henry Huntington, George Getty, and LA Times publisher Harry Chandler, who's pictured to the right of the car door. So when a local Studebaker dealer commissioned this, a proposed traffic ordinance for the city of Los Angeles, it was a cinch for the Auto Club to get it adopted as LA's first traffic code. And it would go on to become the template for traffic codes across the entire country. It proposed a citywide speed limit of 35 miles per hour, which is still the default for much of LA today. And this was really fast for the time. As you saw in the clip of downtown, city traffic often moved closer to 10 miles per hour. It called for restricting pedestrians to striped crosswalks. Actually, it even suggested that pedestrians, quote, not stop or stand on the sidewalk except as near as physically possible to the building line. It also called for building tunnels near schools that kids would use to cross the street. In 1925, the club initiated a bond issue to finance the construction of these tunnels, which voters approved. Later that year, they surveyed the neighborhoods around schools and they selected sites for the first 40 tunnels, some of which are still around today. The city of Los Angeles currently maintains around 90 tunnels near schools. So we have this traffic code, but what about enforcement? How do you get people who are accustomed to using the street like this to completely change their behavior? Well, the police, of course. They were directed to publicly humiliate jaywalkers by blowing their whistle loudly and pointing at the culprit. There were multiple cases where jaywalkers, usually women, were physically picked up and placed back on the sidewalk. And this was very much at the behest of the Auto Club, whose president said at the time that, quote, ridicule of their fellow citizens is far more effective than any other means of enforcement. And the Auto Club also enlisted local Boy Scouts who would hand out cards informing pedestrians of their crime. There's a couple. And the word jaywalking itself was designed to humiliate. So jay was a slang word for an unsophisticated country bumpkin like hick is today. According to this clipping from the Pasadena Evening Post, one woman was so offended by being called a jaywalker that she fainted and had to be transported to a nearby hospital. The Auto Club also understood that to permanently change behavior, you need to reach people when they're young and impressionable. And so they became the leading producer of traffic safety materials, which were provided free of charge to California classrooms. An early example from 1922, a little crude, but certainly direct. Later, the message shifted to obey the police, and then further simplified to just plain old obey. Of course, since this is LA, they also produced perhaps the first traffic safety film, a silent film, where kids are shamed by being compared to geese. It was also in the early 20s that auto clubs across the country began organizing school safety patrols. These were voluntary groups of older students who acted as crossing guards, though their duties eventually expanded to being hall monitors, ratting out their fellow kids for running, etc. They're like a bunch of little narcs in training. The safety patrol had military-style ranks. So kids with the rank of patroller would stand on the curb and hold their arms out to keep younger kids back on the sidewalk. And then they would wait for a natural break in traffic and quickly usher the kids across the street. So the idea was that cars would not have to stop for children. But all this was not enough. Through the 1920s and 30s, LA experienced massive population growth, and it also had the highest car ownership rate in the country by far. And traffic was terrible. So in 1937, Auto Club engineers set out to find a permanent solution to LA's traffic problem. And they would publish this traffic survey, Los Angeles metropolitan area. The survey aspect of it was actually quite impressive and included all these charts and maps showing traffic volumes and drive times. This one shows how long it takes to get to various destinations from downtown. But most significant was what it proposed as a solution, a comprehensive freeway system. It was the first time such a system had ever been suggested. And you can see a bunch of freeways that ended up being built. The 110, the 710, the 5, the 105, the 10, the 210. Many of these followed old rail routes. The key notion was to separate cars from all other forms of traffic and to eliminate intersections. Auto Club engineers invented the cloverleaf interchange and the on and off ramp. Through residential areas, they suggested 360-foot rights-of-way with a 3-to-1 ratio of landscaping to roadway, making the freeway inconspicuous and even beautiful. In business districts, on the other hand, they recommended motorway buildings that the freeways would pass through. The first and second floor would be retail, and the third floor is the freeway. You would exit the freeway using off-ramps, and then drive directly up to the fourth and fifth floors, which were parking. And then there would be offices above. Interestingly, the report also called for eliminating street parking altogether. After all, it takes away traffic lanes and slows traffic as cars enter and leave parking spaces. Auto Club engineers proposed instead that the government acquire land to build parking lots and then charge all vehicles a flat yearly fee to park wherever they want. So suffice to say, not all their recommendations were adopted. But the core of their vision, the freeway system, would become an official plan for the city just 2 years later with the publication of this report. The city's transportation engineers agreed with many of the Auto Club's routes. So here's the Auto Club's map, and again, the city's. They also agreed with the sunken landscape design for the freeways, though without the ample 3-to-1 ratio of greenery to roadway. Pretty close. Now, because the Auto Club represented LA's business interests, they always had this larger vision beyond car-centric roads. They wanted to drive tourism and investment in Southern California. First, in 1904, they had the idea of putting bells along El Camino Real, the Spanish-era footpath that connected all of California's missions. They ended up installing over 400 of these. And while the path itself was a historical fiction, there never really was a footpath. These bells are still a common sight in California and were the inspiration for the Auto Club's logo. To encourage road trips, the Auto Club posted thousands of route markers and directional signs, not just in California, but as far as Kansas, Texas, and Baja California. And they did so until 1956, when the government finally took over. They also started a magazine, Touring Topics, later renamed Westways. In its heyday, Westways was an influential and well-respected magazine whose contributors included brilliant writers like Carrie McWilliams, MFK Fisher, Anais Nin, and surprisingly, Ray Bradbury, a staunch hater of cars who never learned to drive despite spending most of his life in LA. Every issue had a travel feature, always a road trip accessible from LA, like Arches National Monument. The spreads invariably featured a shot of a car in the exotic locale. There were also self-congratulatory features on the Auto Club's many activities, like their signage program, highway planning efforts, and the creation of Driver's Ed, which was first introduced by the Auto Club in LA high schools in 1942. There was also some interesting LA content, like this feature on newsboys and events around town. 1937 was a great year for lectures in Los Angeles. In January alone, you've got fire and its relation to human culture at the Southwest Museum, a Borneo travelogue at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium, and a talk from a leading Japanese feminist at the Philharmonic. Every issue had readers submitted California superlatives, like California's smallest jail, oldest title insurance company, and oldest chinchilla farm, which was located in Inglewood and had 850 chinchillas, which comprised more than 75% of the world's chinchilla population, according to Margaret Vaughn of Hawthorne, California. Of course, it was ad-supported. Even the Asphalt Institute bought ads. Westways also served as a mouthpiece for the Auto Club's political agenda, which often revolved around gas taxes. Okay, so who's ready for a history of gas taxes? The first gas tax in California was introduced in 1923 at the behest of the Auto Club in order to fund highway construction. And then the Depression came along and California was hit hard. In 1933, we had about 5 times as much homelessness as we have today. With revenues collapsing, California considered diverting gas taxes into the general fund, which many states did. But for the Auto Club, gas taxes were sacred. So they pushed a proposition which voters approved, enshrining in the state constitution that gas taxes could only ever be used for highway construction. From the Auto Club's perspective, things were good for a while. When there wasn't enough funding to build LA's freeway system, they got the California legislature to introduce another gas tax. And then AAA convinced Eisenhower to adopt federal gas taxes to pay for the interstate highway system, which initially was to be funded by tolls. But the thing about making freeways and highways, quote, free to drive on, is that it tends to incentivize driving. Here in LA, smog started to become a serious problem. Just like other states have snow days, we would have smog days where kids would stay home from school. So in 1970, Prop 18 was introduced, which would allow the state to divert gas taxes towards smog reduction and mass transit. The Auto Club opposed it, and the proposition failed. And then came the 1973 oil crisis and extreme gas shortages. States wanted to use federal gas taxes for public transit, but they weren't allowed to. This became a matter for Congress. Here's some sample testimony. Quote, from 1956 to 1973, 268 transit systems went out of business. In 1972 alone, highways consumed more than 60% of the federal transportation budget compared to mass transit's 6%. In 1972, we spent $22 billion on highways, more than the total federal, state, and local expenditures on housing, urban renewal, parks, recreation, sanitation, and police and fire combined. Despite AAA's opposition, Congress approved the change. States could now use federal gas tax funds for public transit. And a year later, California voters approved Prop 5, which finally repealed the Auto Club's Depression-era constitutional amendment. So now state gas taxes could go toward public transit as well, though to this day, they can't be used to pay for trains or buses or operations, just the underlying infrastructure.
Tim Chang with the Auto Club of Southern California. Tim Chang for the Automobile Club of Southern California. We are in support of the bill.
Mike Knutson on behalf of the Automobile Club of Southern California, AAA.
Madam Chair, Mike Knutson here on behalf of the Automobile Club of Southern California in strong support.
Tim Chang with the Auto Club of Southern California. We fully agree with both the Senator and Rosemary's testimony on this bill and urge an aye vote.
So as you can see, the Auto Club is still active in lobbying the state legislature, though these days they're mostly advocating for more stringent traffic safety. The Auto Club still teaches Californians to drive, and if you want to see the product of this education, look no further. I am a graduate of the Auto Club Driving School in Torrance, California, and I always use my turn signals. The Auto Club still publishes Westways and educational materials for kids. And AAA still operates school safety patrols across the country. They even just released a short film about them last year.
Is anyone hurt?
Not yet.
Did Jimmy go see he say Kane's white?
He did?
Oh my gosh, are you boys okay?
You saved me?
I guess I did.
Wow. You were right, Ginny.
It seems.
Well, this patrolling thing's pretty cool. I had a question I'm willing to ask you.
Okay, sure.
It's time, Meanwhile. Would you like to go in the dance together?
Yes, G. Wilson, I'd love that.
The whole thing's worth watching. It's on YouTube. It only has 1,500 views. Okay, so what would Los Angeles look like if the Auto Club never existed? I think that's an interesting thought experiment. So to wrap this up, I'm going to show a series of images, and you just applaud, make some noise if you think that this is what LA would have looked like in 2026 without the Auto Club's influence. Does that make sense? Okay. And don't worry, none of these are AI generated. Not much. Okay. Okay. You guys like this one, but not the last one? Different kinds of creatures coexisting with humans? This is actually just Glendale today. This one? The egg? The naked people and the egg? Think about it. Guys, this is just a photo of the San Fernando Valley. It's a trick. All right, that's it from me. Thank you so much.